The second day of 56th International Biel Chess Festival is over, and the first tournament of the Grandmaster Triathlon, the Rapid Tournament, was played. The 8 invited Grandmasters found out who was the better player in the accelerated time control with 50 minutes plus 5 seconds per move. We saw a lot of interesting action, and perhaps let me show you some of them. So we are going to start with the very first round where the Frenchman Jules Musar was playing against the #1 German Grandmaster Winston Kaimer. And here in the two knights defense, white played knight g5, accepting black's challenge to attack the pawn on f7. And after d5, he takes on d5. This leads to a known trick, or the so-called fried liver attack. Knight takes on d5 is a known trap due to knight takes on f7 and queen f3. Black played the more modern knight a5, and this led to a very sharp opening with essentially a battle between two really well-prepared opponents. After bishop b5, c6, takes, bishop d3 is one of the moves, preparing to play knight e4 next. But now, after knight e5, black is threatening to win the knight on g5, play knight f4, followed by knight f3, bishop d6, castles, rook e8, rook e1, and here the young German showed his superb preparation and played f5, threatening to play e5, e4 next, trapping these white pieces, also thinking about starting a kingside attack. The Frenchman accepted the challenge. He was still within the preparation. Queen f6, knight f3, g5, already led to a very sharp game. Black is threatening g4, knight f4, and unleash hell at the kingside. White responded with c4, knight f4, bishop f1, and after g4 it was Jules Musard's time to sacrifice a piece, and he played d4, presumably still a part of the preparation. The hostilities didn't end there. The young German accepted the piece sacrifice, g takes on f3, queen takes on f3, and retreated with the piece. And after queen c3, now that white was threatening to take the knight on a5 and also secure his very strong center, once again Winston sacrificed the piece and he played c5. Queen a5, knight takes on d4. Again, it was the time of the Frenchman to sacrifice. He played bishop e3, and the complications were immense. Of course, for engines, it was easy to say that this is a mistake, but I mean, giving such a nice fork, it definitely feels tempting. The game was a complete chaos, and it was incredibly difficult for both players to navigate in the difficulties. But the game eventually reached a winning position for white after rook d3, b4, king h1, a lot of missed opportunities here. And ultimately, the game led to a position where white had the better position, but in the time scramble, the young German prevailed and was victorious. Very exciting game already in round one. Another game which saw the amazing fighting spirit between the players was Arjun Guy's short masterpiece against, once again, Jules Musar, played in round number 5. And here, after bishop a3, white had a very clear idea. He wanted to trade the ducks with bishops so that he can get to the pawn on a7 and somehow try to bother the black king. Now, it didn't take long for the young Indian superstar to play bishop b6, which is a move actually not really supported by the chess engines. However, after bishop f8, rook takes on f8, white's initiative comes at a halt, and it is incredibly easy to play with black. So probably what the Frenchman should have done here is play king h1, removing this king from the very annoying pin, but after queen takes on c3, everything is still incredibly unclear. He made a mistake. He played rook c1, probably underestimated black's excellent move, knight h6, opening the file, targeting the pawn on f2, and also preparing to play knight g4. Now you see the pawn on f2 and pawn on e5 are under attack. After rook e2, knight takes on e5. Now it was about a material balance, but you could feel that the Indian player is taking over the game. After h3, rook f6, g5, h5. I mean, engines are finding some better chances here for black, but he played a really incredible game. Now you see this very strong threat of queen takes on g3 is becoming a possibility because f takes on g3 is simply impossible. And after king g2, h4, black went on to win the game thanks to a very spectacular shot. Bishop takes on f2, followed by queen takes on g3. Very shortly, Jules Musar had to stop the clock. So that was essentially happening pretty much in every round. So these are the most exciting examples. But already in the very first round, it was becoming pretty apparent that one player stands out from everyone, and that was the Chinese grandmaster Juergen. The one who had won the Chess 960 tournament. He was starting really well also the rapid section. He started with 3 victories in a row, and one of them was against Aronian. So this game was played early in the round 1, and they played out an Imza position. And usually black in this position plays ideas like knight c6, d6, e5, tries to close the center, and then at some point play knight a5, attacking the pawn on c4. Here, the Chinese grandmaster most likely surprised his young colleague, and he played a rather unorthodox-looking knight e8. Now, an knight e8 idea is actually very tricky because it comes with the same idea to bother the pawn on c4, only finding a different route. So he wants to play knight e6, b6, bishop a6, attacking the pawn on c4, and any advancements of white at the king side with something like f4, he could always stop with f5. So for Aronian, this looked like unpleasant news, and he didn't really respond in the best way. He played bishop d3, knight e2, b6, short castle, bishop a6, and tried to organize something at the king side. The Chinese grandmaster stopped it promptly with f5. And now the game took really a typical turn for this variation. Now the knight on g3 is not doing anything, and very shortly Arjun lost his control. So here black already is better, and Juergen eventually just played some very good moves here, having simply a better pawn structure, and went on to win the game rather confidently. So he had a very, very great start, 3 points out of 3, and one would have thought that most likely he will be also the winner of the rapid tournament. However, it was not meant to be, and it took the reigning champion of the GMT tournament, Levon, to take down the leader. They met in round 5, and here the Vietnamese grandmaster showed some very brilliant positional understanding of the position. So it seems like it's some sort of a king's Indian position where black is thinking about maybe removing the rook from f8, play bishop f8, bishop h6, and f5. Now this is something that Juergen already had done in the tournament. However, it was Levon who showed that he understands this position slightly better. So here he played amazing move knight e1, which once again sort of echoes with what had Juergen played himself against Arjun this knight e8 in the previous game. So the idea is rather simple. White retreats with the knight so that he can play f4, knight f3, and fight for the center. Now here the Chinese grandmaster played knight h5. He tried to withstand it. And now the problem of f4 is if black doesn't take it, white gets even more considerable space advantage with f4, f5. Now Juergen took on f4, g takes on f4, and tried to combat as best as he could against white's very powerful breakthrough in the center. e5 was played anyway. Queen f3, another strong move, keeping the knight on h5 in check. Rook e7, knight e3, and rook e8 finally was the mistake. What black should have done, he should have played f5, allowing white at some point to play e6 and establish this incredibly strong pass pawn, but there was simply nothing better. What he did, he played rook e8 and probably just forgot about the threat of knight e4, and now knight takes on d6 looks like it's already deciding the fate of the game in favor for white. Now d takes on e5 probably was a sad necessity. Knight e6. Now Levon simply took the exchange and went on to convert this game to a logical victory. One of the most important games of the GMT Rapid Tournament most likely was played in round 5 when two of the future winners of the Rapid Tournament played against each other. It was the German player Winston Kaimer against the very creative Navara. So here, Winston played a very strong opening. He got a solid advantage, establishing a very nice weakness, a target on c6 that he could pressure. Now, instead of the automatic rook c1, which you would normally expect from white here, attacking the pawn on c6 immediately, Winston started with rook d1. First, trying to push back the black queen. Let's say after queen c7, Winston said after the game he was thinking about queen c3, maybe rook c1 or rook d5, later attacking this pawn on c6 or c5. But this is where he probably was slightly surprised. It was the Czech grandmaster who responded with queen a3, immediately sacrificing the pawn for the activity. Now, of course, he accepted the pawn right away. Bishop takes on c6, bishop h3. Black definitely had a compensation. However, it was David who was essentially struggling to understand how exactly, where, and how is this compensation. So Winston was starting to play some superb chess, slowly but carefully improving the position. David Navara here was losing the control of the game. The compensation already was gone. And in the end, Winston managed to trade the queens and win the game confidently in a rook endgame, right? So David did everything he could, right? He tried to organize a passed pawn at the king's side, but white's advanced pawns at the queen side were simply too strong. So Winston wins the game. And then, before the final round, we had several readers, and what an exciting final round it was, because we saw two amazing games played. So let me show you the first one. Now, this was the game played between the former leader Juergen and Amin Bassem, the Egyptian grandmaster who was recovering after a dreadful start in the Chess 960 tournament. However, it was Juergen who had a great game played. He had outplayed his opponent and now was completely winning. All he should have done here is to play a6. a6, keep the rook on the board, maybe advance it with bishop b7, king h4, king g5, and this normally would have been probably an easy victory for the Chinese grandmaster. But now you probably can't help but feel, why do I need this if I can play rook b7 immediately, right? White decided he can trade the rooks and just advance the a pawn and win the game on the spot. And of course, indeed, this looks like an easy victory. However, this was amazing study-like position where apparently white is not winning. So the Egyptian grandmaster here found an amazing defense, which feels like indeed composed and never happening in the real game. So he played first rook d8, attacking the pawn on d3. Well, doesn't really seem it matters. White played a6, rook d3, a7, rook a3, and this is where you normally expect that black resigns. Of course, he has a passed c pawn, but white has an extra piece. However, if you look more closely to the position, you realize the king on h3 for white is not playing. Now, after c4, bishop d5, c3, bishop b3, here g5 was played, and essentially the white king on h3 is imprisoned. It cannot join the game because at any moment, if white plays g4, black responds h4. So the game continued with e5, king f8, bishop c2, king e7, and you could definitely see the disbelief in Juergen's eyes because there's just no way to make a progress. If you play either bishop f5, bishop f3, or bishop g6, bishop h5, the c pawn for black simply advances. So after bishop b3, king d7, e6, king d6, actually in the end it was white who had to play very carefully because the black king was heading to the pawn on f2. Think about king b4, king a3, king b2, king c1, and win the pawn on f2, and then go back after the pawn on c2. So, however, it was not meant to be, because as soon as the black king is about to threaten to go to c1, Juergen played bishop e4 so that he is in time to take on f3 and retreat back to e4. The game lasted a couple of moves, and then both opponents were smiling. After c2, king c2, we had actually our very first stalemate on the board. Quite a picturesque position. But everyone's eyes were on the game of the last year's triathlon winner, Levon against David Navara. And David Navara clearly is one of the most creative players here. In the first tournament of Chess 960, he played incredibly beautiful game against Egyptian grandmaster Amin Bassem. And here also, this game did not disappoint. So it was Levon who found initially a very beautiful combination. He played d takes on c5, knight takes on c5, and found this beautiful shot, bishop takes on g7. Now the idea is obviously after king takes on g7, it seems that white wins a material. However, after king takes on g7, queen d4 check, king h6, things suddenly are not so simple, because if white takes with the knight on c5, black has a very powerful attack at the king side. Despite the fact that the king is standing on h6, the white king actually feels weaker. Now here Levon's idea was to include intermezzo move knight h4. So the knight on c5 is going nowhere because knight f5 check is in the air. However, David had seen it as well, and he responded with a very powerful move, f5. Now, white has to take the knight on c5. f4 was continued. You see, this cuts off the white queen's defense of the knight on h4, and should the knight go back to f3, after bishop f3, g takes, rook g8, queen h4, black once again is simply checkmating the white king. Now, here Liam found a very nice resource, g3, which David later in the interview would say he simply missed it and didn't really know how to respond. However, he managed to come up with an incredible idea. First, he played bishop e5, which once again, engines don't really like it. Engines think that you would have to take here. Play bishop e5 followed by queen g5, which is something that David saw, but he would say that after king h1, he was not sure how he would proceed because it's a mess, and also his king is weak. There's knight f5 check somewhere threatening. So instead, he played bishop e5, which he believed would normally lead to a draw. And how do you make a draw? By sacrificing a queen. So queen takes on h4, another brilliant move by the top check grandmaster. And now David said that he definitely expected white to accept the sacrifice because after g takes on h4, rook g8 check, you cannot play king h1 due to the bishop f3, king h2, and rook g2. Maybe let me show it to you. And this eventually leads to a mate. This is something we know as a windmill. And after rook g8, king h2, e takes on f3. Unfortunately, there's no mate because white responds with f4. So black would give a check on f3, king h1, and now play rook g2. You would probably imagine that Levon saw some ghosts here because black has rook h2 check, rook g8 check, and it feels there could be a checkmate as this white queen on d3 is rather helpless to help the white king. However, after the precise knight e6, white could always close this g-file with knight g5, and black has nothing better to do than to give a perpetual check. Now, this is what David saw, and he was expected that this is how the game is going to continue, and that's why he was rather shocked when the defending champion played e takes on f4. After queen takes on h3, David simply kept his extra piece because white can never take on e5 because bishop f3 renews the threats of queen g2 and queen h1 mate on the board. After rook e1, rook e8, another brilliant move by David Navara, who once starts making brilliant moves is making one after another. Once again, white cannot take the bishop on e5, and in the end, after queen f1, black went on to win the game thanks to the extra piece. What did it mean for the overall rankings is that Winston, Kaimer, and David Navara shared the first place. Well, technically, according to Rapid Tournament, Winston won it. However, for the overall rankings, it is David Navara who is currently leading in the overall rankings because he played a better tournament in the Chess 960 tournament, which essentially serves as a tiebreaker. The early leader Yu Yanyi, who started the Rapid Tournament, still had a pretty decent finish. And despite the fact that he was the opponent of this amazing stalemate in the last game against Amin Bassem, he finished in the third place with 9 points. Amin Bassem had a very solid performance with 8 points. And then we have Jules Musar with 6, Arjun Regaisi, Levon with 5, and Daniel Bogdandiak had a rather disappointing tournament with only 3 points. So the action will resume on Tuesday when the invited 8 Grandmasters will come back and play the first round of the Classical tournament. Then after 4 rounds, they're going to have a Blitz tournament. So once again, don't miss the action. Come back on Tuesday, 2 p.m. Central European Summer Time, and follow us watching some exciting chess from